Hi, everyone, and welcome. We're so glad that you're here. I'm Philip Steigman, and I'm leading Connected for Kids in partnership with Child Trends and the Thrive Center at Georgetown University. Our goal is simple but ambitious: to align research, policy, and practice around a shared vision of childhood flourishing, so every child experiences connection wherever they live and learn. We're focusing on the elementary age years, 6 to 12, the missing middle between early childhood and adolescence. By age 9, a child's sense of confidence and connection strongly predicts whether they'll stay on track through high school. But these years are often overlooked in policy and funding, but investing in them carries early childhood progress forward and keeps kids on track into adolescence and fills the gap in our place-based cradle-to-career well-being work. And now's the time to do it, because only about 60% of the 20 million children in this age group are flourishing, and we rank 36th out of 38 in well-being for childhood. A century ago, every system serving kids was built for a specific purpose: schools to teach, pediatrics to treat, after-school programs to supervise, sports to build discipline. Each made sense in its time, but none were designed as part of a bigger strategy for children's flourishing. That's the system we're still working with today. I've talked to many of you about this, and we have broad agreement. This lack of a shared vision, though not our fault, ripples down as silos to states and into local communities, making it hard for us to work together, even though we all want what's best for kids. Connected for Kids is about breaking those silos down and uniting us around a shared North Star, a shared definition of flourishing, grounded in research and strong enough to pull systems in the same direction, offering every child belonging, curiosity, and connection, the foundation for lifelong learning and well-being. Okay, before I introduce Chris, I want to let you know that we'll use a few short polls to get your perspective on the work ahead. To start, we'd love to know a little bit about you. Megan will launch the first questions now. Please note that you'll need to scroll down to see the second question. Okay, poll number 1. What sector do you primarily work in? And poll number 2, when you hear the elementary age years, what do you see as the critical work of these years? We'll give a second to fill these out. While you're doing this, just to let you know, feel free to submit questions in the Q&A, and we'll do our best to respond in the follow-up materials after the webinar is over. All right, so we have a pretty nice cross-section of folks from across different sectors. And it looks like there's a slight majority in building socio and emotional foundations, belonging, confidence as the work of these years. Awesome, thank you so much. Now I'd like to bring in Dr. Kristin Anderson-Moore from Child Trends, who's been a guiding force behind this work from day one. Dr. Moore is a senior scholar and former president of Child Trends, a national leader in child well-being research. Chris has spent her career translating data into practical tools for policymakers and practitioners. Chris, over to you.
Thank you, Phil. And hello, everyone. It is wonderful to see so many of you here, leaders from education, youth development, health, philanthropy, and community organizations, all united by your shared commitment to children's well-being. Welcome. I have twin granddaughters who are 10 years old. What a wonderful age. There's so much happening, so much learning, so much change since they were kindergartners. And it always makes me wonder, why hasn't there been a major project focused on this very important developmental period, middle childhood? I remember when From Neurons to Neighborhoods was released 25 years ago. It got so much attention, thousands of citations, and it faced a similar challenge. At that time, people didn't fully recognize how much learning and growth occurred in early childhood. That report changed the conversation and helped put early development at the center of national priorities. A few years later, The Promise of Adolescence did the same for teenagers, helping us to see that adolescence isn't a period to just get through, but a critical time for positive development and opportunity. But somehow middle childhood, those elementary years, has been left out. These are the years when kids can read, make friends, use a computer, play a team sport, and manage big emotions. They're not as cuddly as toddlers or as dramatic as teenagers, but these are the years when children's sense of competence, belonging, and identity take shape, whether positive or negative. We need to lay the groundwork to build a thoughtful, research-informed consensus on how to foster flourishing during middle childhood. And that's why I think the word connected is so perfect. The elementary years are a transitional bridge between early childhood and adolescence that needs to be uplifted. It is a time when children need guidance and connection to navigate growing complexity. And it's a period that shouldn't be left to chance, but instead supported by age-appropriate teaching, services, and opportunities. In short, these are important years, a time when our investments in early childhood either carry forward or fade away, and where the foundation for future well-being is built. That's the space that Connected for Kids is designed to fill, reviewing available research, identifying gaps in research, conferring with stakeholders, and exploring community perspectives, and then translating these findings into policy and practice so that developmental science doesn't just stay on the page, but shapes the real lives of children, families, communities. Now, I'll turn it over to Dr. Pam Cantor from the Human Potential Lab to continue this conversation.
Hi, everyone. At any stage in a child's life, including middle childhood, here's the question we should be asking. How does a child find out what they're capable of? Or put another way, how does each of us become who we become? This is the question that took me to med school and has animated everything that I've studied since. I wasn't destined for med school. If you had known me as a young person, I promise you could have never imagined that one day I'd become a doctor. I was an angry, sad, isolated kid, and for good reason. As a child, I was molested many times by an uncle. When I finally worked up the courage to tell my parents, they told me I could never speak about this. What followed was silence, shame, and in my own middle childhood and teen years, all outrage. But eventually I met this amazing psychiatrist who told me I was a pearl in an oyster, not the ugly, dirty thing I thought I was. He made me believe I was good after I had spent so many years believing that I was bad. My psychiatrist seemed to have these magical healing powers, and I figured he must have gotten them at med school, so I wanted to go to med school too, to heal children who had known trauma and help them recover. Getting in was a mountain, but I did, into one medical school. But then, the night before my first day, I noticed something happening to my voice. First, some crackling as if I was getting a cold. Then, by late evening, my voice was gone. Not laryngitis, gone. I was mute. I was up the entire night in a panic, fearing the humiliation the next day. But in the early morning, I grabbed a clipboard and I wrote on it, "I am Pam, and I don't have a voice today." I can't imagine what my classmates thought of me, the woman with the clipboard, but they didn't embarrass me. They helped me to get through it. And that night, I drove to my therapist's office because I couldn't call him. "What is this?" I said, pointing to my throat. He said it was a severe stress-induced reaction to the first day of med school, and added, "You still don't believe you belong there." He explained the power of stress to frighten, to shut us down, to induce imposter syndrome, and how excruciating it can be when you don't believe you're worthy of something and you don't believe you belong. "Will I get my voice back?" I asked. "How long will it take?" He said it will take 2 weeks to get used to something new like this. Even though I thought he might be making that up, I trusted him and started counting down the days, going to class with my clipboard, feeling myself settle in. And yes, the voice came back in just under 2 weeks. So here are the 2 big things I learned. From my therapist, I learned that trust is an antidote to stress. It melts it away. And belonging would become the most powerful antidote to imposter syndrome. I would come to learn the biology of all of this in med school. And med school was this amazing universe where mysteries were unpacked every single day. I learned about the complex biologic mechanisms that explain the things that we are able to do. And it wasn't just the obvious things like how our hearts and lungs work. It was also about how we love, how we attach and nurture, and how we become conscious of ourselves, and most importantly, how we heal after things go wrong. So I'll never forget the moment in this lecture where I heard this, that there are 20,000 genes in the human genome, yet in our lifetime, fewer than 10% will ever get expressed. I remember sitting there and thinking to myself, well, what determines what's in that 10%? It's context, the environments, experiences, and relationships in our lives. The risks and opportunities in development and learning at any age sit inside this one profoundly important point, that there is no separation between nature and nurture, biology and environment, brain and behavior, only a collaboration between them. Genes, I learned, are chemical followers. They're little packages of protein with lots of receptors that are triggered into action by our experiences and relationships. So this means that genes are not the drivers of who we become. Genes are developmental structures too. Context drives the expression of our genes. And by context, we are speaking of relationships like the one I had with my therapist who taught me that trauma is not destiny. Developmental and learning science paint an optimistic picture of what's possible for all of us, and especially for our young people, because human brains and bodies and abilities are malleable to experience, because the brain is a dynamic living structure made up of tissue that is the most susceptible to change from experience of any tissue in the human body. The brain is also malleable over time. Most of its growth happens after we're born, so there are multiple opportunities to catch up along the way. This is what we need to be thinking about when we think about middle childhood. Here are 3 things I want you to remember about brain development: the astounding malleability of the human brain, experience-dependent growth, and the role of context. But to understand how context gets under the skin and into our brains, I need to tell you something about where learning happens. So we have to go to the frontal lobe and the limbic system. The prefrontal cortex is focus and attention. The hippocampus is memory, especially working memory. And the amygdala is the emotion center of our brain. These structures develop together. The limbic system is loaded with receptors for 2 hormonal systems, one that responds to stress and one that responds to love and trust. This is not an accident. Cortisol is our primary stress hormone, and oxytocin is most often called the trust and love hormone. And these hormones get released because of experiences and relationships in our lives, and they carry chemical messages to the very same structures in the brain. So when we experience stress, and you've had this feeling, cortisol floods our brains and bodies, and we have that fight, flight, or freeze sensation. And if the stress is mild or tolerable, it makes us alert and sharp, like when we're preparing for a test or a performance. But if the stress is unrelenting and it is not buffered by someone we trust, cortisol can do a lot of damage. This is what made me go mute the night before med school. This is because adversity doesn't just happen to us. It happens inside our brains and bodies through the biologic mechanism of stress. But fortunately, that's not the end of the story because there is a big upside when we turn to oxytocin. Oxytocin produces feelings of trust and love and belonging and safety, and that's not all. Oxytocin is more powerful because it literally can protect us from the damaging effects of cortisol. This is why the effects of trauma are reversible, not the events, but the feelings and emotions are. And this is why trauma is not destiny. So it makes me crazy when people talk about relationships as the soft stuff. Our brains are electrical structures, and the primary energy source for the brain's development is human connection. It is the most powerful biologic force there is. It causes the brain to get increasingly wired, and this is called Hebb's law. Neurons that fire together wire together. And as this happens, we become able to do increasingly complex things, whether it's reading, riding a bike, building a robot. This is true of childhood overall, and in particular middle childhood. All you have to do is think of what kids age 6 to 12 are doing and become able to do. So oxytocin supports the wiring of the brain, and it helps set up the conditions for belonging, purpose, curiosity, and exploration, the biologic readiness to absorb something new. Curiosity is a drive state, like food when we are hungry or water when we're thirsty. It could be knowledge we're introduced to and we want more of it. It can be a book you can't stop reading. It can be a new skill, and a coach helps us see that the goal is within reach. The chemical in charge of all of this is a neurotransmitter called dopamine. The dopamine pathway is our reward pathway, and it is released when we're introduced to something that matters to us a lot, very often by someone who matters to us a lot. And the neural cocktail that produces this experience is oxytocin plus dopamine. It is the secret sauce of curiosity, engagement, and agency. This is the brain's activation system triggered by the biology of human connection. So whatever you are designing for young people in the middle years or at any point, it's activating this biology that needs to be your North Star. Think about what we saw in Paris at the Olympic Games. Every single story of athletic performance that we all watched is a story of person, context, and unlocking human possibility. If you take 9-time gold medalist Katie Ledecky, this is what she was thinking as she pulled away from the field in that 1,500-meter freestyle. I kind of let my mind wander during the race, thinking of the people that have trained with me, just kind of saying their names in my head and thinking about them. Ledecky trained in contexts that included relationships with her teammates, her coaches, her physiotherapists, who knew how to bring out the best in her and the best in each other. And she was also reliant on data to build a personalized training regimen. Nothing standardized about this approach. In fact, if we continue to standardize the approach to building talent and skill, for sure it's going to work for some kids, but not for many others. In other words, athletes perform differently, students perform differently at different times and in different contexts. Performance is about fit, the fit between individual and context. It is fit that provides the ability to know what any young person is capable of, and it is fit that unlocks human possibility and performance. This is true during middle childhood and beyond. Human possibility isn't fixed. It is a biologic force inside each of us, waiting to be ignited by the biology of human connection. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Cantor. Such a powerful reminder that there is actual concrete scientific evidence for the impact we make when we see the whole child. Dr. Cantor is the founder of Turnaround for Children and the Human Potential Lab. Her groundbreaking work on the science of learning and development has reshaped how schools and systems understand the role of relationships, stress, and context in learning. Now let's hear a little bit about how this resonates with you. We're going to do another couple of polls. First one is, what do you see as the biggest challenge facing children of this age today? And the second, if you scroll down in your work, how often do you use brain science or developmental research to inform your decisions? Let's take a second. All right, here are the results. The biggest challenge facing children today, it's pretty spread out, but it looks like emotional development, like attention span, self-regulation, persistence. Collective connection and belonging is right up there, and so is technology and social media influences. And then this question about how we use brain science or developmental research to inform decisions, more than half of us are doing that frequently. Okay, thank you. Thanks so much for sharing. Now we'll turn to Dr. Jane Quinn, who has spent her whole career showing how partnerships can make this kind of work possible. Dr. Quinn is a national leader in community schools and cross-sector partnerships. Her work at the Children's Aid Society and the Institute for Educational Leadership has defined what it takes for schools and communities to work together effectively for children's success. Jane, thank you so much for joining us.
I'm so happy to be here and in the esteemed company of so many people I've learned a lot from. I was asked to talk about partnerships, and there are three things I want to talk about. One is why partnerships matter. Then I'm going to talk about partnerships, the relationship-centered nature of partnerships. And then I'm going to talk about collaboration. So let's start with why partnerships matter. I think partnerships matter because no single organization, no matter how skilled it is, has all the knowledge and capacity required to address the complex challenges we face. Many of our current challenges, including the one that brings us together today, call for a multidisciplinary approach, one that brings together the latest knowledge, but that also brings together things like connections, things like social capital, things like communication and advocacy skills. I can say that based on my experience working in and with community schools, real progress can happen when we work across sectors around a shared vision for children. Point number 2, partnerships are relationship-centered and they proceed at the speed of trust. Whether they take place in community schools or in collective impact efforts or in children's cabinets or somewhere else, cross-sector partnerships are effective when the partners plan together from the start, when they clarify their vision, when they take the time to get to know one another, and when they set clear ground rules for how they will work together. Those are 4 of 12 principles of effective partnerships that the National Center for Community Schools has put together in a handout that we are sharing with you as part of this webinar. My third point, note that the center of the word collaboration is labor. And I thank my colleague Abe Fernandez at the National Center for showing that to me. So what kind of labor are we talking about? Well, I think perhaps the most important work done through collaboration is examining data together and making collective meaning of what the data are telling us. Data-driven decision-making gives everyone a chance to practice, to change their practice and strengthen their practice in the direction of the shared outcomes. I think it's time to apply this this way of working, to the problem of the missing middle, that developmental period formerly known as latency, but which we now know is a critical stage in its own right, as well as a building block for young people's subsequent development. So in conclusion, I want to say that partnerships, I think, are how children experience coherence. But this will happen only if we replace fragmented supports, as Phil has pointed out, with a comprehensive connected system that includes plenty of consistent, caring adults, the kind of people that Dr. Cantor was talking about. That's the heart of Connected for Kids, building a movement that has multiple sectors come together to ensure that all our nation's children, especially our nation's school-age children, have an opportunity to flourish. Thanks so much for participating with us today.
Thank you, Jane, for joining us today and for your decades of legendary contribution to children, families, communities, our entire field. Partnerships really are the glue that makes everything else possible. Now, more polls. Let's see what's working in your own communities. Our first question is from a policy and systems perspective. What are the greatest advantages to breaking down these silos across education, health, community systems, pediatrics, faith communities? Just want to get a sense of how much of a benefit this would be to your own work. And then the second question is, what are the risks that come with that? You know, it's going to require a lot of change management to do the kind of work that we suggest needs to happen to make sure that kids have what they need. What are the real challenges that are associated with that? So just take a second and answer those questions, please. Okay, we have some results. It sounds like half of respondents said more coherent supports for children and youth are the greatest advantages of breaking down silos. We also have shared accountability and outcomes, which I think would be part of this, need to be part of this work as well. And then some of the risks that come with breaking down silos, complex coordination across agencies, and we're hoping that this shared North Star would make it easier for that to happen, as well as those misaligned goals and funding requirements. Not as much concern about sharing proprietary approaches, which is really encouraging. Thank you so much. And now we'll hear from someone whose work shows what strong leadership can achieve when communities align around shared outcomes. Jennifer Blatz leads StriveTogether, a national network of 72 communities working to ensure every child has every chance to succeed. Her leadership has advanced the idea of backbone organizations and collective impact grounded in data, equity, and local voice. Jennifer, welcome.
Thanks for having me, Phil, and it's great to be here. I love that this conversation really started with why this matters and what is most important with the research and the science. And, with following Jane, who has spent her career building partnerships, I've spent my career building partnerships. We're really getting into how this works. And I'm going to take us a level deeper because I was asked to talk a little bit about what is the infrastructure, what we call at StriveTogether, the backbone that is needed to really help partnerships achieve impact. So StriveTogether is a national movement working to put millions more young people on a pathway to economic mobility. We do our work through a network. You see a map of our network on the screen, but a network of what we call cradle to career place-based partnerships. And these partnerships bring together neighbors, nonprofits, businesses, schools, philanthropy, policymakers, and anyone in a community who really cares about and is responsible for supporting the outcomes for young people. And these partners come together and align around what works for kids and figure out how to expand those opportunities for young people throughout a community. In our work, we invite partners to make a commitment to set their institutional agendas aside and really center the needs of young people and families. We invite partners to align their contributions toward a shared vision for what young people, what we hope to see for young people in a community if they're thriving. And as Jane was just mentioning, and I love the quote attributed to Abe, but the labor and collaboration. So these partnerships are really intended to look at data to understand what's working and where there are gaps. And then we help support partnerships to collaboratively work together to scale what works and transform systems so that we can produce better and more equitable outcomes for young people. All of this work requires investment because the work to convene partners requires what we like to call civic infrastructure in a community. And that's where the role of the backbone entity or organization comes into play in this partnership work. The backbone in StriveTogether's model refers to the core functions that support a partnership's collaborative work, ensuring that sustained operation and progress toward shared goals is in place. And the functions of a backbone include, as I just mentioned, data collection and analysis, collective planning, communication, and advocacy for the partnership's work with funders and other stakeholders. The backbone helps coordinate partners, ensuring that they're aligned to achieve community-wide impact. And it plays a very critical role in ensuring that a community is connected for kids. So we're going to take just a quick look at what this looks like in one of our partnerships in our network. As I mentioned, we have 70 partnerships across the country in 30 states. So this is Dayton, Ohio. Learn to Earn Dayton is an example of a backbone organization. And Learn to Earn's purpose is to support partnership work in Dayton, Ohio, and Montgomery County, but is increasingly supporting partnership work with a coalition of other place-based partnerships across the state of Ohio. So in a community like Dayton, different stakeholders, including school leaders, local nonprofits, and others, have identified shared challenges in the community using science and research and data, and this critical time in a young person's life is just one of the areas cradle to career that Learn to Earn Dayton is focused on. And so they set a goal, for example, around improving a key outcome. So in this case, I'm using the example of early grade literacy and their work together, which again, we know that these types of although I'm talking about an academic outcome of early grade literacy, there's so much outside of what happens in a school building that contributes to improving outcomes in early grade literacy. So you see here on the slide, a 19% increase in proficiency in one region. That was one of the big impacts. But the reality is so many different partners in that community needed to come together to move outcomes for young people around that particular outcome area. So this type of collaboration and partnership is what we call a place-based partnership. And as I mentioned, this work is happening across our national network, but in communities all across the country. And this really gets to what it's going to take, the type of infrastructure and investment that we need in place in order to ensure that we are truly connected for kids.
Thank you, Jennifer. That's such a powerful example of what coherence looks like in practice. Thank you for moving mountains to break down silos at the local level. And our hope is to support your place-based work with much more coherence. Let's check in with everyone on this topic. We have a couple more poll questions. The first is, what type of place-based partnership structure currently exists in your community? And the second is, what supports would help your community strengthen alignment for kids? So take a second to answer those questions, please. All right, we have some results. In terms of place-based partnership structures that exist in your community, the highest proportion is school district community partnerships. We have about a fifth of you have a children's cabinet or some kind of cross-sector coalition. 18% have a collective backbone organization like StriveTogether or Harlem Children's Zone. And then in terms of the second question, what supports would be helpful? It's sort of right down the middle. It looks like all of these equally. Funding and possible policy flexibility, shared data and outcomes right at the top of the list, clear frameworks and tools for collaboration. And we are really hoping to be able to help you with that, with this project. I'll share a little bit more about the solution that we're building together through Connected for Kids, just so we can make this real for you. We've talked about why a community-based focus on flourishing is so critical and how partnerships make it possible. Now we want to share what Connected for Kids is doing to make it happen and why this moment matters so much. At its heart, this initiative is about coherence, about bringing together the 200 plus frameworks, organizations, and funding streams across education, youth development, mental health, and pediatrics that shape children's lives. Why do we have so many models? Well, our theory is that it's because as strong as the research is, we've never really truly coalesced around it the way, say, the early childhood community has united around warm, responsive interactions. 200 sets of rules? If I was still running after-school programs, I'd be tearing my hair out if I had any left. But the deeper issue is that this fragmentation creates the silos you face every day, within your sectors and across sectors. Our theory of change is that we can bring coherence and funding together, coherence to policy and funding, by uniting around that shared North Star. And we already have the raw ingredients to do it. We have a strong base of developmental research about what kids need, much of which we just heard from Dr. Cantor. We just haven't pulled it together into one shared actionable vision. Dr. Quinn said it best. These years are not a developmental pause. They're not latency. The brain isn't going to hibernation for 6 years. It's when planning, problem solving, and relationship skills take shape. And focusing on flourishing doesn't conflict with our focus on education. It strengthens it. It's not either or. Children learn best when they feel safe and supported, when they build strong relationships and have real opportunities to explore interests, develop competence, and work through challenges. In short, a healthy learner needs to be a healthy kid first. Maslow's hierarchy of needs, right? When we invest in healthy kids, we raise all the boats, however we define success: academics, well-being, economic mobility. And this moment really does call for it. The digital world brings incredible opportunities to explore new interests and connect with people around the world. But we need to help kids navigate both the risks and the possibilities. You've probably read or heard about the book, The Anxious Generation by Jonathan Haidt. He talks about how the digital world puts pressures on children that we've never seen before. The pull of social media and its impacts on self-image and attention span, the pull of AI friends available to substitute for peers, and we know they don't replicate the benefits of human relationships. They're also dealing with lingering post-pandemic effects. These factors are redefining childhood faster than our systems can keep up. But in the interest of not being doom and gloom, let's move past hand-wringing and meet the moment. So how are we planning to do that? Well, here's what we're thinking. First, we activate the ecosystem and lay the groundwork. That's what we're doing right at this moment, here at this webinar. We're bringing people together across all sectors into a coalition. And we're asking our allies to acknowledge the gap here and commit to co-creating the shared North Star with us, which will be the next phase of the work. We're also identifying local communities in which to pilot the toolkit that we'll talk about in a little bit. And finally, we're working on raising the resources to keep this work moving. As the coalition grows, we'll launch a rigorous, consensus-driven process, much like what From Neurons to Neighborhoods did for early childhood, to define what flourishing really looks like for children this age. That study will answer 3 big interrelated questions. First, we'll establish consensus on the developmental work of these years, presumably something like building a sense of competence through experiential learning and having the strong foundation of belonging and relationships to unlock that. We'll need to consider subgroup differences, including the age of the child, economic status, cultural groups. Second, based on that understanding, we'll establish consensus on what flourishing looks like and how we measure it. Something like the portrait of a thriving youth from the University of Virginia for this age group, which we don't have right now. And what does it look like to be flourishing by the time you're ready to enter into adolescence? And finally, how do we promote this concept of flourishing across sectors? What are the specific strategies that the caring adult in a child's life can use? The result will be two connected products, a report that we're calling the profile of an elementary age child, and the second, the community toolkit that translates this understanding into a shared playbook of actual real life strategies customized for different roles, families, schools, after-school programs, health providers, faith communities, camps, youth sports. And once complete, these tools will provide a common foundation that partners across sectors can naturally align to, informing how systems measure success, how programs design supports, and how investments can reinforce one another. That's what From Neurons to Neighborhoods did for early childhood 20 years ago, and it's what we can do now for the elementary age years. Finally, we're planning to pilot this model in real communities, places with strong coordination structures like children's cabinets, cradle-to-career networks, and backbone organizations like Jennifer's StriveTogether partners and their colleagues. They'll use the toolkit to align strategies, track progress, and learn what works. So what could this look like in practice? Meet Maya. She's 9 years old and full of curiosity. At school, her teacher encourages her to ask big questions and see mistakes as part of learning. Her after-school program helps her build confidence through playful exploration. At her clinic, her pediatrician checks in not only on her physical health, but on how much she likes learning and feels like she's part of her community. Each adult is doing their part, but what makes the difference is that they're all working from the same playbook. The language of belonging, curiosity, and connection shows up everywhere Maya goes. This can happen if policy supports it. Imagine if Title I funds supported school community partnerships that track both academic progress and well-being. Imagine if Medicaid reimbursed preventative practices that build belonging and connectedness. Imagine if 21st Century Community Learning Centers and Child Care Development Block Grant funding shared training and data systems so their staff could use the same language around emotional regulation and peer connection, and this made it easier to blend funding. This approach gives local leadership the policy support it needs. It makes the community itself the center of the community, everyone rowing in the same direction to give kids what they need: the pediatrician, the third grade teacher, the basketball coach, the faith leader, the cashier, the bus driver. Hey, Maya, how's school? How's basketball practice? How's your grandma? And instead of having to justify these practices because they're not measured or swim out of their lanes to make them happen, the system actually reinforces them. The conditions for belonging, curiosity, and connection would no longer be accidental or dependent on individual heroics. They would actually be built into how communities work. Okay, Megan, let's launch our next poll. So how does this land? The first question, how valuable would a shared framework for children's flourishing be to your work? And the second, would your community or organization be interested in piloting this approach locally? If so, definitely get in touch with us. All right, we have some results. All right, 3/4 of you say that this would be really, really valuable, extremely valuable if we had this shared framework. So hopefully we'll be part of this movement together and we'll make it happen. The second would be, would you be interested in piloting? Yeah, all right, so about 70% would be interested to some extent. So that's good to know. Let's definitely talk more. Thank you so much. Those insights will be really helpful to shape where we go next. As we get ready to wrap up, we'd like to hand it over to Zakia Red and Celene Domitrovich to talk about next steps. Just by way of introduction, Zakia Red is a nationally recognized researcher focused on child and family well-being. At Child Trends, she guides research that connects data and practice to improve outcomes for children across youth development, education, and family systems. With more than 2 decades of experience leading cross-sector initiatives, Zakia's work emphasizes collaboration, measurement of common outcomes, and the translation of research into actionable strategies for communities and policymakers. Second, Dr. Celene Domitrovich is a child clinical psychologist and prevention scientist whose research focuses on how schools and communities can nurture the social, emotional, and cognitive skills that help children flourish. As the director of research at the Georgetown University Thrive Center, Celene leads efforts to translate developmental research into practical intervention strategies for educators, families, and community organizations. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Phil. And what an incredible hour. And what a reminder that when we come together across sectors, disciplines, and communities, we can create something far greater than what one system can do alone. We've heard from researchers, practitioners, and community leaders about what it takes for children to flourish. And the common thread running through all of it is connection, belonging, relationships. These are not soft ideas. These are the conditions for learning, for health, for resilience. And that's what Connected for Kids is about, taking what we know from science and practice and using it to reshape how policy, programs, and funding can work together to improve the lives of children.
Thanks, Zakia. And this launch marks just the beginning. From here, our next step is to co-create a shared vision of flourishing in the elementary years, grounded in developmental science and lived experience. We'll be working with partners across sectors to identify what flourishing really looks like for children, families, and communities, and how to measure and support it. And this won't be a top-down exercise. It will happen with communities, not to them. Together, we'll be piloting this approach in local partnerships where schools, after-school programs, health systems, and families can use a common playbook for helping children thrive. Before we close, please think about how you would like to stay involved in this work and respond to the final question in our poll. What next steps are you most interested in? All right, waiting for those results. Let's see. Hopefully they'll be nicely distributed so we can get everybody involved in all aspects of this work. Yeah, it looks pretty evenly. Wonderful. Well, we're going to have some follow-up. I'm going to turn it back to Zakia.
Well, thanks everyone for sharing how you would like to stay involved. We're excited to see that. And we know that this work won't be easy, but the momentum in this room and across the country really gives us hope. Our job is to carry this energy forward and to build a movement that helps every child grow up healthy, supported, and full of possibility. To stay connected, please follow our Connected for Kids newsletter on LinkedIn. And there you'll receive updates on the next phase of the project and learn about opportunities to collaborate in the future.
This work is urgent, but it's also deeply hopeful because we already have what we need: caring adults, strong communities, and a shared desire to help kids flourish. We look forward to continuing this journey with you. Phil?
Great. Thank you so much, Celene, Zakia, and thank you all for being part of this launch and for everything you do for children and families every day. In the coming days, we'll share a follow-up email with the webinar recording, a Q&A, questions to the Q&A answers to the Q&A questions that you put into the Q&A, our newsletter link, and a national sign-on letter that invites leaders and organizations to formally support this effort. Signing on will help us demonstrate broad commitment to creating a shared vision of elementary age flourishing and to advancing the systems change needed to make it real. We're laying the groundwork now for a national process and local pilots, and as we bring together the partnerships and funding we need to sustain it, this work will begin in earnest. The more alignment we build early, the faster we can move when the moment comes. We'd love for you to join us in this effort and to share it widely with your networks. This is just the beginning of something that we're building together. Thank you.